Stop feeling sorry for yourself. Seriously. Unless you've survived 2 nuclear explosions in the span of a few days, sold your company shares for couch money before it turned into a $100 billion empire, or literally died because you kicked a safe too hard, your life is functioning just fine. Today we're looking at 30 people whose bad luck didn't just visit. Occasionally, it basically moved in and changed its mailing address. This isn't having a rough week. This is the universe locking eyes with you, smiling and saying, "Watch this." From the lottery winner who couldn't collect a dime to the genius who changed the world but forgot to patent it. These stories sound made up. They aren't. Trust me, by the end of this video, your worst day will feel like a spa weekend. 1. Tsutomu Yamaguchi may be the only person in history who can say he was hit by 2 atomic bombs and lived to talk about it. In 1945, he was an engineer on a business trip in Hiroshima on August 6th. When the first bomb detonated, he was just a few miles from ground zero. Burned, shaken ears ringing the city behind him turned into hell and somehow still alive. Most people would take that as a clear message from the universe to lie low. Not him. He boarded a train back to Nagasaki to recover and file his report. 3 days later, on August 9th, while explaining to his boss how a single bomb could erase a city, another flash lit up the sky. The second atomic bomb exploded over Nagasaki. 2 nuclear blasts, 3 days, same man. He survived again and went on to live to 93. At some point, you have to imagine death checked his file and said, "You know what, he's been through enough." If you think you're unlucky, remember that very few people get double-tapped by history itself and walk away. 2. Ronald Wayne once owned 10% of a tiny startup called Apple. Yes, that Apple. In 1976, he was the 3rd man in the room alongside Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak when the company was founded. But Ronald wasn't the risk-everything type. He worried that if the company failed, creditors would come after his personal assets. So 12 days after signing the founding documents, he backed out and sold his entire 10% stake for $800. $800. For perspective, that 10% would be worth well over $100 billion today. He essentially traded generational wealth for the price of a decent couch and a few nice dinners. Ronald has said he doesn't regret it, and maybe he truly doesn't. But every time he sees that glowing Apple logo in a coffee shop somewhere in the world, you have to wonder if there's a faint echo in his head, the sound of an opportunity quietly leaving the room far too soon. 3. Some men survive years of war only to miss peace by a single minute. Henry Gunther is the cruelest example of timing being everything. On November 11th, 1918, everyone knew the armistice would take effect at 11 a.m. The clock was ticking down. 10:59. Just 60 seconds left before the guns would fall silent after 4 years of horror. For reasons historians still debate, Henry charged a German machine gun nest against orders. The German soldiers reportedly tried waving him back, knowing the war was about to end. He kept running. Shots were fired. He fell. 1 minute later at 11 a.m., the war officially ended. Henry Gunther became the last American soldier killed in World War I. After surviving trenches, artillery, and gas, he missed living through peace by the length of a commercial break. Sometimes history doesn't need a grand tragedy. It just needs a clock that's 1 minute ahead of you. 4. There's a very thin line between confidence and becoming a cautionary tale in a physics textbook, and Gary Hoy sprinted straight across it. A successful lawyer in Toronto, he loved demonstrating to interns that the windows of the Toronto Dominion Center were unbreakable. To prove it, he didn't tap lightly on the glass. He took a running start and hurled his full body weight at a 24th floor window. And he was half right. The glass did not shatter. It held firm, solid, and proud. The problem was the frame holding the glass in place. It gave way instantly. The entire pane popped out, taking Gary with it, and both fell 24 stories to the street below. He won the argument about the strength of the glass. He lost the footnote about structural support. If confidence is the key to success, physics is the door that refuses to negotiate. 5. The odds of winning the lottery are already tiny. The odds of being hit by a rock from outer space are astronomically smaller. Anne Hodges didn't buy a lottery ticket, climb a volcano, or conduct a dangerous experiment. In 1954 in Alabama, she was doing something apparently reckless in the eyes of the universe, taking a nap on her couch. The sky was clear. The neighborhood was quiet. No warning that the cosmos had locked onto a target. Then a grapefruit-sized rock tore through her roof, bounced off a large radio console, and slammed into her hip. It was a genuine meteorite traveling millions of years through space to complete one perfectly timed landing on a sleeping woman. She survived with a massive bruise and the distinction of being the only confirmed human ever struck by a meteorite. But it didn't end there. Her landlord sued her, claiming the space rock belonged to the house, not to her. Anne survived an intergalactic assassination attempt only to end up in a property dispute over extraterrestrial debris. That is a level of bad luck even the universe has to respect. 6. You might expect a whiskey legend to go out in some dramatic fashion at a loud party or after decades of hard living. But Jack Daniel, founder of the world-famous whiskey brand, met an end that reads more like a cautionary tale about anger management. One morning in 1911, he arrived at his office early and tried to open his safe. The problem was simple: he couldn't remember the combination. After a few minutes of frustration and zero high-tech solutions available, he chose the most human option possible. He kicked the safe as hard as he could, barefoot. The safe was perfectly fine. His toe was not. What seemed like a minor injury became infected, then developed into blood poisoning. In a time before modern antibiotics, one impulsive kick turned into a death sentence. He died from complications caused by his own temper. People often say he kicked the bucket, and in this case, the phrase is both metaphorical and painfully literal. 7. Before the Beatles became a global phenomenon that made the entire planet scream, a drummer was grinding it out in small clubs, sleeping in cold vans, believing he was building the future. That drummer was Pete Best. He was there in the early days when fame was just a distant fantasy and the gigs barely paid. Then in 1962, right before everything exploded, manager Brian Epstein called him into a room and told him the band wanted to replace him with Ringo Starr. Not after they failed. Not after things cooled off. Right before Beatlemania took over the world. Within months, the Beatles were the most famous band on Earth. Pete went back to a regular life working ordinary jobs, while every time he turned on the radio, he heard the soundtrack of the opportunity he had just lost. There's missing out, and then there's missing out on a cultural earthquake. Pete didn't just leave a band, he stepped off a tidal wave. 8. If the history of science were an awards show, Rosalind Franklin would be the person who did all the work backstage and somehow got left off the poster. She was the brilliant chemist who captured Photo 51, the X-ray image that revealed the double helix structure of DNA. That wasn't luck. That was precision discipline and serious intellectual power. The problem was that her colleagues showed the image to James Watson and Francis Crick without her permission. They looked at it, recognized the answer, and published their groundbreaking paper. They won the Nobel Prize and became scientific icons. Rosalind did not. She died of ovarian cancer at 37, likely linked to prolonged exposure to X-rays during her research. Nobel Prizes are not awarded posthumously, so history officially recorded 2 names, while the woman who took the decisive photograph was relegated to a footnote. Sometimes the greatest discovery isn't the structure of life, it's the structure of credit. 9. If anyone deserved a Nobel Prize for making humanity realize how small it is in a vast universe, it was Edwin Hubble. He proved that the faint smudges in the night sky weren't just stars inside the Milky Way, but entirely separate galaxies, and that the universe itself is expanding. In other words, he didn't just expand astronomy, he expanded the human perspective. The only problem was that for decades, the Nobel Committee didn't recognize astronomy as a legitimate branch of physics. They looked at work that reshaped cosmology and essentially said impressive, but not quite. Hubble spent years advocating for the rules to change. Finally, in 1953, the committee agreed and prepared to award him the prize. It was practically certain. Then he died of a stroke just days before the decision became official. Nobel Prizes are never awarded after death. He changed the rules, opened the door for future astronomers, and ensured others could win. He just didn't live long enough to collect his own trophy. 10. If you've ever felt like you missed out on getting rich, meet John Sutter, the man who owned the exact land where the California gold rush began. In 1848, gold was discovered at his sawmill. By normal logic, that's the moment you sit back, count your fortune, and prepare to become one of the wealthiest men in America. But logic was not fate's specialty. News spread faster than Sutter could react, and hundreds of thousands of prospectors flooded his property like a tidal wave of greed. They didn't ask permission. They didn't pay rent. They trampled his crops, slaughtered his cattle, tore down his buildings for firewood, and mined gold straight off his land. Legally, he owned one of the most valuable pieces of real estate in the country. Practically, he couldn't control the mob. Instead of becoming a gold tycoon, he was driven into bankruptcy and spent the rest of his life petitioning the government for compensation. He didn't just miss the train to wealth. He was standing on the tracks when it ran him over. 11. The odds of being struck by lightning once are so low that most of us worry more about getting our hair wet in the rain. Roy Sullivan was different. A park ranger in Virginia, he seemed to have a personal subscription to Thor's anger management issues. Over the course of his life, he was struck by lightning 7 times. 7. He was hit while driving his truck while on patrol in the woods and even in his own front yard. His hair caught fire so often that he started carrying a bucket of water with him just in case. He earned a Guinness World Record as a human lightning rod, and people genuinely avoided standing near him when storm clouds rolled in. After surviving hundreds of millions of volts, burns, injuries, and close calls that defy basic probability, you might assume Roy was the luckiest man alive. But the final blow didn't come from the sky. At 71, he took his own life over an unrequited love. He could endure the fury of the heavens, but not a broken heart. Nature tried 7 times and failed. Emotion only needed 1. 12. Surviving the Titanic sounds like winning a golden ticket out of one of the deadliest disasters of the early 20th century. For Masabumi Hosono, it was the beginning of a social sentence. He was the only Japanese passenger aboard the ill-fated ship. When it went down, he secured a spot on a lifeboat and escaped death by inches. He returned to Japan expecting relief, maybe even quiet gratitude for surviving. Instead, he was branded a coward by the press and public. According to the samurai code still echoing through society, he should have gone down with the ship rather than save himself. He lost his job. His reputation was shattered. Textbooks even used him as an example of how not to behave. He spent the rest of his life in shame, reportedly wishing he had drowned in the Atlantic rather than face the icy judgment of his own country. Escaping the ocean was a miracle. Escaping public condemnation proved nearly impossible. 13. If patience were a virtue measured in decades, Guillaume Le Gentil would qualify for sainthood. The French astronomer was determined to observe the rare transit of Venus across the Sun, an event that occurs in pairs, separated by 8 years, and then not again for over a century. In 1761, he set sail for India to secure the perfect viewing location. War between France and Britain prevented his ship from docking, forcing him to observe from a rocking vessel at sea. He missed it. Undeterred, he decided to stay in Asia for the next 8 years. 8 years of preparation, recalibration, and waiting for one single day. On the morning of the event, the sky was clear. Then at the exact moment the transit began, a lone cloud drifted in and blocked the sun for the entire duration. 8 years for one cloud. When he finally returned to France after more than a decade, his family had declared him dead. His wife had remarried and his property had been divided. The universe didn't just block his view of the sun, it eclipsed his entire life. 14. The race to the South Pole in the early 20th century was less a competition and more a frozen test of human stubbornness. Robert Falcon Scott led the British expedition across endless ice fields, dragging heavy sleds through winds that felt designed to erase hope itself. Frostbite, starvation, exhaustion, just another Tuesday in Antarctica. For months, they marched toward one goal: to be the first humans at the bottom of the world. On January 17, 1912, they finally saw the marker. Hearts pounding, victory within reach. Then they saw it, the Norwegian flag already planted, flapping confidently in the wind. Roald Amundsen had beaten them by 34 days. All that suffering for second place in a 2-team race. Scott wrote in his diary that it was a dreadful place. Crushed but determined, the team turned back, facing an 800-mile return journey in worsening conditions. They never made it. They died in their tent during a blizzard, knowing they had endured everything only to arrive just a little too late. 15. Arnold Schoenberg was a revolutionary composer, but his greatest adversary wasn't a critic or a rival. It was the number 13. He suffered from severe triskaidekaphobia and structured his life around avoiding the cursed digit. He dreaded turning 76 because 7 plus 6 equals 13. He avoided hotel rooms numbered 13, avoided the 13th of any month, and especially feared Friday the 13th as if it were a personal appointment with doom. On July 13, 1951, which fell on a Friday, he stayed in bed all day to avoid tempting fate. His wife reassured him as the hours passed. At 11:45 p.m., it seemed he had survived. But at 11:47 p.m., exactly 13 minutes before midnight, Schoenberg reportedly whispered the word harmony and died. He spent his life running from a number, and in the final minutes, the universe did the math. When fear becomes the axis of your life, sometimes it doesn't need to chase you. It just waits for the calendar to cooperate. 16. History usually shifts because of massive battles, thunderous speeches, or treaties signed in heavy ink. In the case of King Alexander of Greece, it shifted because of a monkey. In 1920, the king was strolling through the royal gardens with his German shepherd when a palace monkey suddenly attacked the dog. Alexander rushed in to break up the fight and was bitten on the leg and torso. The wounds initially seemed minor, the kind of story you might recount at a dinner party for dramatic effect. but infection set in, quickly developing into sepsis. Within weeks, the king was dead. His death triggered the return of his exiled father to the throne, leading to disastrous political decisions and a war with Turkey that cost hundreds of thousands of lives. Winston Churchill later remarked that it was not an exaggeration to say 250,000 people died because of that monkey's bite. Sometimes history doesn't pivot because of artillery. It pivots because something in the garden loses its temper. 17. Ramon Artagaveitia had a perfectly valid reason to fear the ocean. In 1871, he survived a horrific ship fire and had to swim for his life in sheer panic. The trauma was enough to make him swear he would never set foot on a vessel again. For 40 years, he kept that promise. No sea travel, no steamships, no brave attempts at conquering his fear. The ocean to him smelled like smoke and saltwater terror. Then in 1912, friends and family convinced him that times had changed. Ships were larger, safer equipped with modern technology and watertight compartments. There was even talk of a new luxury liner considered unsinkable. Ramon finally decided to face his fear and boarded the ship, believing history had learned its lesson. That ship was the Titanic. After 4 decades of avoiding the sea, he chose the one voyage destined to become the ultimate maritime disaster. Fate didn't ambush him. It waited patiently for 40 years to finish the job. 18. Martin Todd experienced what it feels like to become a millionaire for a few brief hours, then lose it all because of a slip of paper smaller than your hand. He and his wife bought a lottery ticket in the UK, and when the numbers were drawn, they matched perfectly with the multi-million-pound jackpot. They imagined a new house, travel, and financial freedom. There was just one problem. They couldn't find the ticket. They tore the house apart, searched drawers, pockets, every possible hiding place, but the ticket vanished as if it understood its own value and chose to disappear. Martin contacted the lottery company, and here's the most painful part: their system confirmed he had purchased the winning ticket. They knew he was the winner, but the rule was ironclad: no physical ticket, no payout. He spent years in legal battles trying to claim what was technically his, but rules do not negotiate with emotion. He became a millionaire on paper and broke in reality. Some people never win the lottery. Martin did. His wallet was never found. 19. Some people lose a pair of pants and buy a new pair. Others lose a pair of pants and declare war on the United States legal system. Roy Pearson belonged to the second category. In 2005, he brought a pair of trousers to a small family-owned dry cleaner in Washington, D.C. The shop misplaced them. Annoying, sure. Worth $54 million, Roy thought so. At the time, an administrative judge, he argued that the shop's satisfaction guaranteed sign constituted a legally binding promise. He sued for $54 million over emotional distress and breach of trust. $54 million for pants. He represented himself in court, turning the case into a multi-year legal circus. The result? He lost. Completely. Not only did he receive nothing, but he also lost his judicial position after a review board determined he lacked proper temperament. He traded a pair of missing trousers worth a few $100s for nationwide ridicule. Some battles aren't worth winning. Some shouldn't be fought at all. 20. Daisuke Inoue may not be wealthy, but nearly every bar on the planet owes him a thank you note. In 1971, he invented the karaoke machine, a simple device that allowed ordinary people to grab a microphone and imagine themselves as rock stars. The idea reshaped global nightlife culture. But Inoue was a musician, not a businessman. He chose not to patent the invention because he thought it would be greedy. He simply wanted people to sing. Corporations did not share his moral hesitation. They copied the concept, mass-produced machines, and made hundreds of millions of dollars. Inoue earned almost nothing in royalties. Estimates suggest he missed out on around $150 million. Instead of mansions and yachts, he received an IG Nobel Peace Prize for giving people a new way to tolerate one another through off-key performances. He invented a machine that turns the tipsy into divas. He just forgot to invent a way to turn applause into profit. 21. If you think you're unlucky because you slipped on a banana peel, once meet Frane Selak. The Croatian man seemed to have a direct contract with death itself. In 1962, he survived a train derailment that plunged into an icy river. A year later, he was on a plane when the door blew open mid-air. He was sucked out of the cabin and landed in a haystack while the aircraft crashed. He survived. Then came a bus accident, 2 separate car crashes, a car that burst into flames while he was driving, and even a plunge off a cliff. In total, he narrowly escaped death at least 7 times in ways that would make action movie writers hold emergency meetings. People call him the luckiest man alive because he kept surviving. But imagine what it feels like when every trip sounds like the trailer for a disaster film. Then, in a plot twist nobody saw coming, he won nearly $1 million in the lottery in 2003. After a lifetime of dodging death, the universe finally seemed to say, fine. Here's your refund. 22. Violet Jessup wasn't a captain or a wealthy passenger, just a stewardess working aboard massive ocean liners in the early 20th century. And somehow she kept choosing ships that made history in bold letters. In 1911, she was aboard the RMS Olympic when it collided with a warship. In 1912, she served on the Titanic when the unsinkable ship struck an iceberg and sank into the Atlantic. She survived. That alone would make for a lifetime dinner story. But it didn't stop there. In 1916, she was working on the HMHS Britannic Titanic's sister ship when it struck a mine in the Aegean Sea. It also sank. She survived again. 3 major ships, 3 disasters. One woman walks away each time. She earned the nickname Miss Unsinkable. If you've ever stressed about picking the wrong flight, remember that Violet selected ships the way other people pick horror movies and still made it out of the theater alive. 23. William Huskisson was a firm believer in technological progress. As a British politician, he strongly supported the development of railways at a time when many people still debated whether trains were a brilliant innovation or reckless madness. In 1830, during the grand opening of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, one of the first intercity rail lines in the world, Huskisson attended as an honored guest. He stepped off his train to shake hands with the Prime Minister while steam locomotives moved along the tracks nearby. This was before modern safety standards or clear platform boundaries. When another train approached, Huskisson panicked and tried to climb back into his carriage, misjudging both distance and movement. The locomotive ran over his leg, causing catastrophic injuries. He became one of the first recorded railway fatalities in history at the very ceremony celebrating the birth of the railway age. The man who championed the future of transportation became its earliest warning label. It's the kind of irony history doesn't need to exaggerate. 24. Marie Curie stands as a symbol of brilliance and courage in science. She won not 1 but 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 different scientific fields, an achievement almost no one else has matched. She pioneered research into radioactivity at a time when radiation safety was barely understood. She handled radium with her bare hands and carried glowing test tubes in her pockets like scientific jewelry. Her laboratory shimmered with a faint blue light, something we now recognize as a hazard, warning not a magical glow. During World War I, she developed mobile X-ray units that helped save soldiers' lives. She gave her strength and health to science in the most literal sense. Years of radiation exposure severely damaged her bone marrow, and she eventually died of aplastic anemia directly linked to that exposure. The woman who opened the door to the atomic age paid with her own body. Sometimes the greatest discoveries don't just change the world, they consume the person who makes them. 25. Some people go to war and face bullets every day. Others spend their youth mastering the art of staying just far enough from the front lines to survive. This soldier belonged to the second group. When war broke out, he found ways to avoid being deployed into direct combat. He took logistical roles, transferred units, and delayed assignments, always hovering at the edge of danger rather than standing in its center. Years passed, friends fought and died, he endured remarkably untouched. Then the war ended. No more sirens, no more gunfire, just celebrations and relief spreading through the city. He stepped into peacetime believing he had finally outsmarted fate. And then, at an ordinary intersection, a traffic accident happened. No uniform, no battlefield, just metal colliding in a single mistimed second. He survived the entire war, only to die on one of the first peaceful afternoons that followed. Sometimes fate doesn't need cannons. It just needs a car moving slightly faster than you are. 26. This inventor believed he had finally found a way for humans to challenge gravity without paying for it in broken bones. He designed a parachute that could deploy mid-air and allow a jumper to land safely. To prove how revolutionary it was, he organized a public demonstration. A curious crowd gathered, all eyes fixed upward as he climbed to the test platform, radiating the confidence of a man who had personally negotiated terms with the laws of physics. He jumped. The parachute opened flawlessly. The canopy spread wide, the lines pulled tight, the mechanism worked exactly as designed. It should have been a historic moment. There was just one small detail he overlooked. In his excitement, he forgot to attach himself to the parachute. The device floated down one way. He came down another. The crowd didn't witness the birth of modern aviation safety. They witnessed a brutal lesson in pre-flight checklists. The invention worked perfectly. The human component did not. Sometimes the distance between genius and catastrophe is no longer than an unfastened strap. 27. Long before Facebook became the place where people post breakfast photos and argue politics with strangers, there were visionaries who saw the social network concept early. One young developer built an online platform back when the internet still sounded like a robot choking on dial-up tones. His system had personal profiles, friend lists, internal messaging, and even a wall for status updates. All the ingredients for global domination were there. What wasn't there was the business engine behind it. No investors, no scaling strategy, no legal team is protecting the intellectual property. A few years later, another platform emerged: cleaner interface, sharper growth plan, global ambition. The world pivoted into the social media era, and the early innovator watched as the technological tidal wave rolled past him. He had the right idea at almost the right time, but he lacked the final piece. In tech history, being first isn't enough. You have to know how to hold on to what you build. 28. If life were an action movie, Walter Cavanaugh would have signed a stunt contract before graduating high school. Before turning 20, he had already accumulated enough near-death experiences to make an insurance company reconsider its entire business model. He was struck by lightning, an event so rare that most people never witness it once. He was bitten by a venomous snake, nearly drowned, and most impressively survived 2 separate plane crashes, 2 falls from the sky before he was old enough to legally rent a car. While his friends worried about grades and first dates, Walter seemed busy stress-testing human survivability. The strangest part is that he didn't just survive, he kept stepping back into vehicles and situations, as if checking off challenges on a list. Some call him the luckiest man alive because he lived to tell the stories. Others might argue that repeatedly standing in the exact place disaster strikes is not the textbook definition of luck. His guardian angel probably filed for overtime. 29. If there was one man U.S. presidents might have preferred not to stand next to, it was Robert Todd Lincoln. The eldest son of Abraham Lincoln, he seemed destined for an unsettling, supporting role in America's darkest presidential moments. In 1865, he was nearby when his father was assassinated at Ford's Theater and rushed to his bedside as he lay dying. Years later, serving as Secretary of War, he was standing with President James Garfield at a train station in 1881 when Garfield was shot. Garfield died. If that wasn't eerie enough, in 1901, President William McKinley invited Robert to an exposition in Buffalo. McKinley was assassinated there. 3 presidents, 3 shootings, 1 common witness who was never the target. After the 3rd incident, Robert reportedly declined future invitations to major state events, believing his presence carried fatal consequences. He didn't pull a trigger. He didn't plan a thing. Yet history kept placing him in the front row of tragedy. If Robert walked into the room, it might have been wise to locate the nearest exit. 30. Marcus Garvey experienced the rare and surreal moment of reading his own obituary while still very much alive and conscious enough to be furious about it. In 1940, the prominent political activist was recovering from a stroke in London when a U.S. newspaper heard a rumor that he had died. Without thorough verification, they published his obituary. The article didn't just announce his passing, it portrayed him as irrelevant, isolated, and unsuccessful. Imagine sipping your morning coffee and reading a detailed summary of your life, framed as a disappointment. Garvey read every line, absorbing each sentence like a verdict on his legacy. The shock, anger, and emotional strain reportedly contributed to a second massive stroke. This one was real. He died soon after. In a dark twist of irony, false news about his death became the catalyst for his actual death. Not everyone gets to fact-check their own obituary. Marcus did. He just didn't have enough time to respond. So the next time you miss a bus or spill coffee on your shirt, remember at least you're not the guy who kicked a safe and died because of it, or the soldier who missed peace by 60 seconds. History is full of people who never quite caught a break. Compared to that, maybe today isn't so bad after all.